Got it. Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another year, another session. This time we're going to start a new series called Mass Media and Public Opinion. Did I get that right?
You did.
Pat?
Redux.
Redux. Not redo, Redux. And we're very excited to welcome everyone here today. We will get started in just a minute. Just a reminder that we are recording. So if you would like to ask a question anytime, jump on in, but you will be recorded. If you choose to not be recorded, but you still have a question or a comment, feel free to put it in the chat box and I will relay it at the appropriate time. No problem. And that's all I got for you, Pat. I'll send it on over to you.
Okay, good. Thank you. Welcome back, folks. Just as a reminder, we had collectively decided long ago and far away that this would be the topic that folks would find most interesting in terms of thinking about changing politics. And I think particularly the problem of partisan polarization that we kept coming back to, dressed up in different clothes in different kinds of situations, but that we kept returning to the media as playing a crucial role in partisan polarization. So by the same token that we started looking at public policy and then tried to understand what had changed, how it had changed. I'm going to do the same thing now with the mass media. And the public opinion part is because that's the part that we're interested in. How's this affecting politics? Some of that is at the elite level, but at least our immediate focus is on the impact on ordinary citizens. So here we go. So the premise of this set of sessions is that the media have changed pretty dramatically from the old system, the pre-internet, pre-cable news era, to the present. So that, again, just like the public policy thing, maybe we need a revised theory to understand the way that the media are having impact on ordinary citizens. So I'm going to start out with the express version of Robert Enman's theory, the book that I posted, Democracy Without Citizens, that I've mentioned in the past. It's a really, really great parsimonious theory. That means it's really simple, but it explains a lot. So it's a powerful theory. And then we'll move on to how things change. But the first thing I want to do is I just realized there could easily be some folks, I'm looking at you, Paige, and Kat too, who have no idea what that old media environment looked like. So I thought I'd just kind of describe it because it really, it's.
I at least was like born before 9/11. Like that blows my mind with like the 20-year anniversary.
Yeah.
That like there's a lot of people, like I don't really remember a world without terrorism being like the center point of everything like in the world, but I was at least born like after 9/11 happened. So
yeah. No, you all the right, yeah, you are old. You're old. Get over it. If the new media are a benchmark, y'all are old. So the old system, looked like the following. For one thing, you had 3 networks on TV. That's it. ABC, NBC, CBS. That was it. A little bit later on, you get PBS and NPR. On radio, you have local radio that's locally owned, right? Not large media corporations that own gazillions of local radio stations, a robust set of local newspapers. Some cities, depending upon the time that you look at, multiple newspapers that were daily. And again, locally owned newspapers, a small number of the national newspapers like the Post and the Times, the LA Times. Locally owned radio stations that didn't have talk shows like Rush Limbaugh. You didn't have any of that. So it was small, right? There weren't lots of different options. And really, it also meant that the content was pretty narrow and pretty similar as you move from one outlet to another. There weren't really big differences. As a matter of fact, I had somebody coming to the mass media class again before all of this change occurred, and he did his impression of somebody in the TV news department reading the local newspaper. And he sort of cracked it open. He went, got that, got that, got that, got that. There was just a lot of duplication. Everybody was following the same thing, and they followed it in pretty much the same way. There's a famous study called Boys on the Bus. Some of you may have had a communication studies class where occasionally they'll assign that as a book. And it described in a campaign, the media reporters on a bus that would follow a candidate line, they just kind of bounced their ideas off each other so that everyone ended up with pretty much the same kind of story. Okay? You didn't have a lot of diversity in perspective at all. You were getting the same thing no matter what. Okay? Does that make sense? Does it give you at least some kind of sense? And for the oldsters, does that ring true for your experience?
Well, and Pat, also you did touch on and it was a lot less analysis and opinion. You had that, but
Right.
there was a separation between here are the facts of the day.
And it was factual.
And look, we have plenty of criticisms about the old media, so I don't want to go that far. But
right.
And like on Sunday morning, it was a big deal because you watch, what was it, the McLaughlin group or whatever? Like you'd actually watch the pundits get together and go at it. So you didn't have pundits going at it like now on cable news 24/7. It was Sunday morning for an hour, and maybe you had like one other venue. Like you didn't have this constant churning of stuff.
Right. And even that occurred like later on during because that older media environment like predates even me.
What was there like a specific, was this like Insidious, like the changes, or was there like a specific turning point where you saw like everything kind of change? Maybe I'm getting ahead.
Little bit, but I mean, it occurs at different points in time with different reasons for different media. Okay, so it's
yes and no.
It's complicated in that certain things about ownership rules and regulation changed radio, so it became a friendly place for the right-wing crazy-ass talk shows. The advent of the internet, beginning of cable TV, right? So there are different things that cause the different media to change in that direction at different points in time.
I just
Okay,
realized
so-
that this, what you're talking about, predated cable. So,
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, we didn't grow up with cable. There was no cable
Right.
until I was like a junior in high school. And even then, hardly anybody had it. It was expensive.
And it wasn't that many
Yes.
channels.
Oh, right. You're right. Initially, there wasn't that much going on there.
Yeah.
And so you had those other things, right? Is that, I mean, first,
And there was no
Changes.
Google.
But remember, you didn't have computers and
I
you didn't have
remember no
cell
Google.
phones.
are you
You
guys
had
getting,
phone books. You
are
had
you
phone
getting
books.
nostalgic?
we're too nostalgic right now in like the world. Literally, we had like the hurricane hit the day of Katrina, Afghanistan, all in the same week. And I'm like, are we trying to go back to 2003, 2002? Is this how, is it like
Yeah.
between
Well,
2000?
that's not even that far back. It needs to be further back.
Well, yeah, but it's nostalgia. Like, I don't know. I feel like we're on this nostalgia binge right now.
All right, so that's what the old environment looked like. And here's what Entman does. Entman identifies three entities and then specifies a set of relationships that exist between them. So the three entities are the mass media, ordinary citizens or the mass public, and then political elites. Usually you're talking about elected officials. Okay. With the mass media in between ordinary citizens and elites. Get it? They mediate the relationships between those two parties, between ordinary citizens and elites. After all, elites aren't going to be knocking on your door and chatting with you directly. They're going to communicate through the media. And you aren't going to have a terribly effective direct voice trying to speak directly to elected officials. You know, some undergraduate student doing an internship in the representative's office is going to open up your letter and type out a response. You're not really doing that. So the media can play that crucial intermediary role. So we want to focus on the nature of the relationships between these three parties. And a central guiding thing, the book is like a 1990. I think it's a 1990 publication date. The scholarship on mass media developed what was called a needs and gratifications approach. That is, if you want to understand how these entities interact with one another, pay attention to what each one of them needs. Pay attention to what each one of them finds gratifying, they enjoy, they want. Okay? So to go through them one at a time, if you think about ordinary citizens, we'll go back to the cornerstone of the policy class. Remember, ordinary citizens aren't interested and they don't know squat about politics. So they don't want that. They would much prefer entertainment. I just hopped on the real scholarly source for most Americans, Wikipedia, and looked at top-rated shows ever. And Super Bowl is like all over the place, right? And the one news program that shows up is 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes changed the way that they covered politics and covered the news by trying to make it more entertaining, by introducing elements of conflict. You know, they would have the sappy, you know, human interest kind of stuff as well, but they really introduced that matter of the conflict. That this is this is how the old Saturday Night Live routine started. Does anybody want to do the Jane, you ignorant slut? there was the point counterpoint thing that they introduced that Dan Aykroyd took and ran with. So the public wants entertainment. The media want profits. These are businesses. They need to make profit. There's one additional element here that pertains not to the media as a business, but rather the journalists who work in the media. And if you're a journalist, your professional reputation depended upon you adhering to the professional norm of objectivity. You weren't supposed to be biased. You would move up in the profession by really taking care to protect your reputation as being objective. And if you weren't, you could watch your career just fall apart. Okay? Public officials, elected officials particularly, they want to get reelected. They want to have higher approval ratings because it gives them more power. Okay? So you've got the public wants entertainment, the media wants money, profits, while protecting journalists' sense of prestige through objectivity, and elites want re-election and increased approval ratings. So this has been a little while, so we're going to go back to sharing the screen. Oop, you got to help me out here, Michelle. Let me share the screen. There we go. See if I can find it here. Oh, come on. All right, are we good? Okay. So this is what you have is a series of exchange relationships, right? This should have the same flavor as sub-governments, you know, where two parties, each one provides the other with what they want. So in the first linkage there between the mass public and the mass media then wants to provide entertaining stories to the mass public, okay? And the mass public provides their viewership, which enables the media to generate revenue through ads, okay? Political elites provide the mass media with the material they need for interesting stories about politics. We're just focusing on politics, right? So they're gonna provide that kind of potentially entertaining news to the media. In return, the media are going to provide stories that the political elites hope will be beneficial to them. You ought to be able to see there's more tension in this relationship than there is between the relationship between mass media and mass public. Because the really entertaining story that the media need to provide to get viewers is probably not a puff piece on the elected official. Okay, so there's some tension there, but there's no way that political elites get those stories about themselves unless they cooperate with the media. Okay, does that make sense, y'all? Okay. All right. That relationship between the mass public and mass media, Entman calls that the economic market. Okay. And then the relationship that exists between the media and political elites is the political market. Okay. All right. I did that in a real quick nutshell. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So the element I want to add in here is that journalistic norm of objectivity, because that's not part of that set of relationships, right? I didn't mention objectivity there at all. This is simply a factor that's layered in on top of what's going on in the economic market and what's going on in the political market. But it helps you understand some important things about the behavior of the mass media. And this is one of those things that ordinary folks think of as this puzzle. You know, when you tell them there's this journalistic norm of objectivity, and journalists are always really trying to be objective, because if they don't, they're going to have their reputation ruined. They go, but you know, when I watch the news, it looks biased to me. I see bias all over the place there. And you had my favorite was a right-wing group called Accuracy in Media. And it was a guy, I can't remember who he was, a physicist or something, and he decided that the media were terribly liberal. They were just biased in a liberal direction. And that has resonance, right? There are all kinds of people who think the media are biased, and I think particularly, I mean, you can see it on both sides, but you really see conservatives challenging the objectivity of the media. And you know, there's one piece of information that gives that the air of plausibility, and that is flat out, journalists are more liberal. They're more liberal than the mass public as a whole. So how does that work with them being liberal, but they're supposed to be objective? What's winning out there? What's happening? I did want to, just because this is a really wonderful classic illustration of this point, I wanted to, do any of you remember the live interview that Dan Rather did of George H.W. Bush? This is a pretty famous broadcast, and you're going to get, this is sort of the exception that proves the rule. You're going to watch this and you're going to go, well, that doesn't sound like anything Pat was talking about. But precisely because it differed from the practices that I'm talking about, it had big consequences for Dan Rather. So we'll watch this as long as you guys want to watch it. Let me see if I'm sorry, I'm out of practice these days. Okay, let's try it again.
Come on, you old man. You
Oh,
can.
I know. I'm just
I
a
was too
dumb
busy talking to him. I forgot to ask him if he had to prep or anything. We were like chatting about everything. I was like, why did you choose Rutgers? What path were you going?
Yeah.
And he's like talking, and oh, I forgot to say, do you want to test
Yeah.
anything before we start?
Well, oh God. Why can't I do this?
You definitely built up the suspense in what we're watching. That's for sure.
I know. Do we have it now?
Looks like it.
Yeah, I just got to make it bigger and press
Okay.
play and it should work.
Vice President, thank you for being with us
Yeah, and then
tonight.
turn up your volume.
Bill serves as your trusted advisor. He was deeply involved in running arms for the country, and he didn't inform you. Now, when President Reagan's trusted advisor, Admiral Poindexter, failed to inform him, the president fired him. Why is Mr. Gregg still inside the White House and still a trusted advisor?
Because I have confidence in him, and because this matter, Dan, as you well know, and your editors know, has been looked at by the $10 million study by the Senate and the House. It's been looked at by the Tower Commission. The Rodriguez testimony that you put on here, I just think it's outrageous because he was totally vindicated, swore under oath that he never talked to me about the Contras. And yet this report you're making, which you told me or your people did, you have a Mr. Cohen that works for you, is going to be a political profile. If this is a political profile for an election, I have a very different opinion as to what one should be. And Don Gregg works for me because I don't think he's done anything wrong. And I think if he had this exhaustive examination that was gone into by the Senate and by the House, would have showed it. And you've impugned my integrity by suggesting with one of your little boards here that I didn't tell the truth about what Felix Rodriguez. You didn't accuse me of it, but you made that suggestion. And other people in the meeting, including Mr. Nick Brady, and he has said that my version is correct. And so I find this to be a rehash and a little bit, if you'll excuse me, a misrepresentation on the part of CBS, who said you're doing political profiles on all the candidates, and then you come up with something that has been exhaustively looked into.
Mr. Vice President, what we agreed to or didn't agree to, I think you will agree for the moment, can be dealt with another way. Let's talk about the record. You say that we misrepresented your record. Let's talk about the record. If we misrepresented your record in any way, here's a chance to set it straight.
Right.
Now,
I just set it straight on one count, but could you imply from that little thing, I have a little monitor sitting on the side here, that I didn't tell the truth? Now, this has all been looked into.
Where do we imply that, Mr. Vice
Well,
President?
just here on this board where you had the idea that Bush says that he didn't hear about the Contra supply from Felix Rodriguez. Felix Rodriguez testified under oath. He has been public, and you could have at least run a little picture of him saying that I never told the Vice President about the Contras. I'm asking for fair play, and I thought I was here to talk about my views on education or on getting this deficit down.
Mr. Vice President, we want to talk about the record on this because
Let's talk about
the framework here is that one third of the Republicans in this poll, one-third of the Republicans, and one-fourth of the people who say that they rather like you believe you're hiding something. Now, if you are, here's a chance to get it out.
You know what I'm hiding? What I told the president. That's the only thing. And I've answered every question put before me. Now, if you have a question,
I do have one.
Please.
I have one.
Please.
You have said that if you had known, this was an arms for hostages swap, you would have opposed it. You also said that you did not know that.
Can I answer that?
That wasn't a question. It was a
Yes, it
statement.
was a statement.
Let me ask the question if I may first.
Created this program, as testified or stated publicly, he did not think it was arms for hostages. And it was only later that, and that's me, because I went along with it, because you know why, Dan? Because
That wasn't a question,
I
Mr.
saw
Vice
Mr. Buckley, heard about Mr. Buckley being tortured to death, later admitted as a CIA chief. So if I erred on the side of trying to get those hostages out of there.
Mr. Vice President, you set the rules for this talk. I didn't mean to step on your line there, but you insisted that this be live, and you know that we have a limited amount of time.
That's why I want to get my share in here.
The
on
president-
something other than what you want to talk
The
about.
president has spoken for himself. I'm asking you to speak for yourself, which you have not been willing to do in the past. And if I may suggest that this is what leads people to say, well, either George Bush was irrelevant or he was ineffective. He said himself he was out of the loop. Now, let me give you an example. He said, ask the question.
And explain out of the loop. No operational role. Go ahead.
Now, you've said that if you'd known it was an arms for hostage swap, you would have opposed it. You said the first year there was an arms for hostage swap was in December of 1986.
When the
correct?
whole thing became briefed to me by Senator Durenberger.
Exactly.
And the proximity of arms to hostages much closer.
But Mr. Vice President, you went to Israel in July of 1986, and a member of your own staff, Mr. Craig Thorpe, has verified, and so did the only other man there, Mr. Nir, Emerald Nir, who's the Israelis' top anti-terrorist man. And those two men were in a meeting with you, and Mr. Nir not once, but three times underscored with you that this was a straight-out arms for
What
hostage
they
swap.
were doing.
Now,
Read
how do you
the
reconcile?
memo. What they were doing.
How can you reconcile that you were there, Mr. Nir, underscored three separate occasions There was an arms from hostage swap and told you were dealing with these radical elements in Iran. You were dealing straight away with the Ayatollah Khomeini.
Know what they were doing and not what we were doing. And that's the big difference. Dan, I expressed my concerns and reservations about that. That has been testified to under oath by Mr. Poindexter. And it's been confirmed that I had reservations and spoke up by Don Regan. In fact, he said the other day that I expressed them to the president.
That's
I
correct.
don't discuss what I talked to the president because there's a principle involved. Nothing to do with Iran-Contra. It's the principle of confidentiality between the president
Mr.
and the
Vice
vice
President,
president.
Mr. Vice President,
Yes.
the president himself said he wants all the facts out. He gave up such things as even his own diary. Every principle,
He
including
did not
Secretary
give up his
Schultz,
own diary.
he gave up some of it.
Well, you must be careful here because you're.
Yes, sir, I want you to be careful, Mr. Vice President, because
I
the
will
problem-
be careful, but I
The
want to.
problem here is that you repeatedly said in the meetings, you said in the meeting in which Secretary Schultz, in the most forceful way, registered his objections. And then you said you never heard anybody register objections.
If it was the most forceful way, I've heard George Schultz be very, very forceful. And if I were there and he was very, very forceful at that meeting, I would have remembered that. I don't remember that.
And how do you explain you can't remember the other people in the meeting say he was
Maybe I wasn't
apoplectic?
there at that point.
You weren't in the
I'm not
meeting?
suggesting, I'm just saying I don't remember.
I don't want to be arguing, Mr. Vice
With
President.
you, Dan.
No,
This is not a
no,
great
sir.
night because I want to talk about why I want to be president, why those 41% of the people are supporting me.
And
And
Mr.
I
Vice
don't think
President,
it's
these
fair to
questions are
judge a whole career. It's not fair to judge my whole career by a.
Wait for it. Wait for it. This was the big dramatic moment where it all kind of blew up.
Rehash on Iran. How would you like it if I judged your career by those 7 minutes when you walked off the set in New York? Would you like that? I
Mr.
have
Vice
respect
President,
for you, but I don't have respect for what you're doing here tonight.
Mr. Vice President, I think you agree that your qualifications for president, and what kind of leadership you bring to the country, what kind of government you have, what kind of people you have around, is much more important than what you just referred to. I'd be happy to.
I want to be judged on the whole record, and you're not.
And I'm trying to set the record straight.
You invited me to come here to talk about, I thought the whole record.
I want you to talk about the record. You sat in a meeting with George Schultz.
Yes.
He got apoplectic when he found out that you and the president were being party sending missiles to the Ayatollah of Iran. Can you explain how you were supposed to be you're an anti-terrorist expert. Iran was officially a terrorist state. You went around telling you wanted those. Mr. President, the question is, but you made us hypocrites in the face of the world. How could you sign on to such a policy? And the question is, what does that tell us about your record?
Signed on to it. The same reason the president signed on to it. When a CIA agent is being tortured to death, maybe err on the side of human life. But everybody's admitted mistakes. I've admitted mistakes. And you want to dwell on. And I want to talk about the values we believe in and the experience and the integrity that goes with all of this. And what's I'm going to do about education. And there's nothing new here. I thought this was a news program.
Well, I had hoped, Mr. Vice President, you would tell us to whom you expressed your reservations.
Yes, I did.
When you expressed them, and what the
I
reservations
testified
were.
under oath.
What were the reservations?
Reservation about getting the control of an operation in the hands of a foreign country.
Had enough? Get the idea?
The volume was a little bit down a bit. So essentially, but what I got from that is that it started out with, he thought he was, before it blew up, right? I got that part. I was paying extra close attention to that. But essentially the expectations were different showing up. He thought it was for one reason and rather came in with obviously hardball question.
Let me explain what was really going on. Bush is desperately trying to get the nomination, and I'm going to put it the way that one of my colleagues described George H.W. Bush. This is a guy with an incredible resume. He's held all these offices in the government. None of them had any real decision-making ability associated with them. He called them the bag. He called him a bag man. That was what he did, and he always kind of conveyed this image of being, I'm going to be extreme about it, servile he could refer to Ronald Reagan's economic program as voodoo economics, and then be his lapdog for 8 years in the White House. Okay, so I love this because it shows what happens when the norms get violated and why the norms might get violated. So there's no way Bush should be behaving that way. You don't want to behave in that way. It's different because it's live. So this means he gets to communicate directly with ordinary citizens. It means that what he's doing there is he doesn't want to talk about his programs. He doesn't want to talk about his record. He wants to convey to ordinary citizens who are voting in Republican primaries that he can be a tough guy. He's not just the servile lapdog of Ronald Reagan. He's a tough guy. In other words, you're not really dealing with the mass media at that point. This is his direct connection to those folks. So he's going to behave in a different way than you would expect. Okay. And it means that Bush never took any flack for the fact that Rather had him dead to rights. Rather had him dead to rights. He was absolutely right. You know, this was something that Bush didn't want to deal with because it was associated in that arms for hostage deal where the Reagan administration was doing this end run on congressional legislation that prohibited exactly what they did. Okay? He's absolutely busted. But Rather pays a heavy price because he just keeps going. He has no choice, right? If he stopped, Bush was going to keep babbling for the entire time. You could tell Bush was trying to take up as much airtime as he possibly could to squeeze Rather out. Okay, no journalist is going to put up with that nonsense. Okay, but he's in a difficult situation because no public official ordinarily would behave in that way. Okay. And Dan Rather's reputation really took a hit. His professional reputation, his standing in the profession really took a hit because he looked like he was biased. Okay. He violated that professional norm and he paid a price. Bush, on the other hand, gets real benefits out of that broadcast. Do you want the 6 or 7 minutes that he walked off the stage? Do you know what that is? There was a sporting event going on, and it was a pretty important sporting event. I can't remember what it was now, but it was going to delay the evening news. They were going to cut into the evening news, and Rather was the anchor on the evening news, and Rather just got absolutely livid, and walked off the stage. As it turned out, the sporting event ended a little early, so they had like dead air for a few minutes before they could get started. It was an incredibly embarrassing thing for Rather's career, and it was the kind of juvenile thing to do. Now, does that help? I like showing that clip because it's sort of the exception that proves the rule. This is an interaction between media and public officials that shows you what happens when they don't play by the rules. Okay. But this leaves journalists in a difficult situation because how in the world do you display that you're objective? How do you do that? Keyword is balance. And I'm going to describe this, and it's going to sound incredibly familiar to everybody. On any story, you interview someone on one side of the issue, and then you interview somebody on the other side of the issue. Get it? It's balanced. I'm not biased because I gave each perspective an opportunity to put their statement out there. Okay. By the way, just because I'm never going to give up a chance to take a shot at Trump, that's why journalists were just absolutely helpless dealing with Trump. If they were going to be balanced, they always had to offer whatever crazy thing Donald Trump had to happen to say. Adding to it, it was always going to be more entertaining than anything else that could have been said. So it's going to be really, really attractive to put on. Okay. Nonetheless, I'm gonna make a bet that every person here has watched a news broadcast from traditional mainstream media and thought it looked biased, that it sounded biased, right? We've all done that. How in the world does that happen? Here's the deal. Entman makes an important, and plenty of students struggle with this distinction, wants to make a distinction between, bless you, bias and slant. Okay, if there's bias, that means that the broadcasting, the programming would be consistently liberal or consistently conservative or consistently pro Democratic Party or consistently pro-Republican Party. Slant is that it's going to shift from time to time. Okay? In other words, it's not about just that relationship between those journalists and the information that's there. There's something else going on that can change over time. Here's the deal. Objectivity and the way we do it's a matter of perception. And so when we're watching that, even if there is perfect balance, we can perceive it as being biased. Okay, it's really slanted, but we're going to perceive it in that way. Here's the way you can spot slant, and you'll be able to see that it's going to vary for different public officials at different points in time. First of all, what kind of importance does the story take in news coverage? Do they just keep hammering Benghazi? Do they just keep hammering Jimmy Carter's embarrassing brother, Billy Carter? Do they just keep doing stories on that? Or is it just not given that place of importance? Criticism. How much negative evaluation do you find in the article? Linkage. Think about this as responsibility. To what extent do they, because most of this talking about coverage of the president, in what way, to what degree is the president linked to whatever bad thing that's going on? Is it treated as something that's just going on in the Treasury Department? Or is it something that's going in the Treasury Department and the president had something to do with it? Okay. And then perspective. It's not just going to be one source on one side and one source on the other side. There are going to be a number of different kinds of sources. Well, how varied do they happen to be? The story becomes particularly damning if the sources that are critical of the president come from all over the place. And the sources supporting him are all from this one narrow perspective, okay? It's gonna be, therefore, slanted in a negative direction toward that office holder, okay? Does that make sense? And those things aren't inherent in what party or ideology that political elite happens to be, okay? Why does it exist? The most important factor is what Entman calls evaluation biases, all right? And that's just, what is the actor or the president's approval ratings look like with ordinary citizens? Approval ratings go up and they go down. If the approval ratings are high, the media are going to be loath to provide an awful lot of criticism because that would look biased, right? Everybody else thinks the guy walks on water and you're running this critical piece. You could only be doing that if you're biased against him. So you're protecting that journalistic norm of objectivity by, to an extent, mirroring what the public already thinks about that office holder. Similarly, another source of evaluation biases pertains to elites. What is the president's standing in Congress? Are members of Congress willing to say things that are critical about the president? Or are they not? If you don't have sources among other elites to be critical of the president, it's going to be hard to do that. And it's also just for journalists a cue that they ought not be attacking that president. I know this is from the wrong period, but at least it's a relatively recent illustration of this point that y'all are going to get. Think W. Think about what his press coverage looked like right after 9/11.
Did we lose him? Think.
Oh, he's gonna be so sad.
Yeah, he's gonna be mad. Especially he's talking about W. Or W. Oh, there he is. Yeah, unmute yourself.
Yeah, all right. I didn't touch a thing, I swear. His coverage, I don't know how much you got. I'm no fan of George W. Bush. Comes no surprise to any of you. But I thought the coverage was unfair. He was just taking an absolute beating at the end of his administration. And there were times when I thought, this is really not, they're just, the analysis here just is, it's not right. It doesn't make any sense. It was responding to his incredibly low standing among ordinary citizens and Congress, okay? Because that enabled journalists to portray themselves as being objective, okay? Another source of slant. Sometimes the story itself is easy, okay? It really fits in with the way the media work. So is it a nice, simple story? Media are going to run with it then, okay? It's my old line that, you know, if journalists knew anything, they'd actually be doing it, but they don't really understand politics. They just don't. They don't understand it. They can follow it and they can throw out a lot of facts, but they don't understand it. So if you can make it simple, one, they're going to be able to latch onto it as resonance for them, and it fits the needs of the audience, right? The second thing is it a story that can be personalized? If it's something about abstract principles or abstract financial practices, no. Even if those practices are relatively simple, if you can attach it to a person, it's less entertaining. Okay. And then finally, symbolization, and that's the symbolic politics that we talked about ad nauseum, right? Then some minor things. Does it happen to be a slow or a busy news day? That can affect what kind of slant you see. And then if any of you looked at Entman's book, it's essentially a series of case studies of Carter and Reagan. Well, Carter was horrible, absolutely horrible in dealing with the media. And Reagan was really, really comfortable dealing with the media. He did, in general, Reagan just handled those situations better than Carter did. Okay, so even though, and that this is sort of one of the points of the book, even though the things that happened during the Reagan administration were far more appallingly awful than the stuff that Carter got beat up on, Carter paid a much higher price in terms of negative slant on those stories than Ronald Reagan did, in part because Carter just sucked at managing the event. He thought he was above all of that. Okay, one last thing here. Even if the coverage was, and this goes back to the matter of perception, even if the broadcast, if the news item, if the news coverage is slanted in one direction, folks from different perspectives, even if it's slanting toward your direction, you may still see it as biased in the other direction. It's a really interesting psychological kind of process. And ironically, this phenomenon is even greater the more knowledgeable the person happens to be. Okay, so there's this famous study done by Robert Vallone and his colleagues long time ago, 1985. They worked with a really, really balanced broadcast on the Middle East situation. They had a sample that was essentially a quota sample, where they had a group of respondents, folks in the experiment who were pro-Israeli, and then another set of folks who were pro-Palestinian, and then some folks who were kind of in the middle. So they show each one of them that really, really balanced broadcast on the Middle East. Both the pro-Palestinian and the pro-Israeli folks thought the broadcast was biased against their perspective. Both of them did. And as they were more knowledgeable about the conflict, they saw more and more bias against them. Pretty interesting finding, right? There are a couple of things that go into this. One is what psychologists call a negativity bias. I'll take you back to your undergraduate days and course evaluations. Y'all may not know this, but when faculty would go through their course evaluations, back when you'd get them on paper, you'd go through them, and the good ones you'd go, yeah. And then a bad one would come and you'd go, oh shit. The bad ones, for reasons that we don't fully, they have a greater impact on you. You remember them longer. Okay. There's a faculty member that I knew while I was there, and he tacked up all the negative evaluations that he got on courses, tacked them up on his bulletin board. Okay. Again, we don't fully understand exactly why the negativity bias exists, but it does. Okay. On top of it, and this gets to the matter of knowledge, if you know more, there are more things you know that they left out of the broadcast. Okay. So the more I know, the greater the likelihood that there's more and more and more stuff that, damn it, they should have had in that program. They left that out. They ignored this information that buttresses my position. Okay. So there's all that perception going on, and that's part of what journalists are trying to deal with. Okay. Is they're always kind of paying attention to what public opinion looks like, and they're paying attention to how elites think, because if they don't move with that, they're going to increase the degree to which their audience sees them as biased. There's always going to be some, but you don't want it to reach critical proportions if you're going to protect your reputation as a journalist. Okay, does that all make sense? Okay, that was what I planned for tonight, and I figured next time I take a look at his model for understanding under what conditions media content affects public opinion, in what ways. But I just wanted to kind of set the stage there. So yell stuff at me, put questions, things that are occurring to you. Aside from the fact that most of you are now old. Can you record that? Can you? Nothing.
Well, Pat, I don't really have a question, but
I don't need questions, just whatever yeah.
Are you gonna get into kind of some of the, and you sort of touched on it a little bit with the mass media in terms of the people who own the newspapers and their incentives, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, I mean, are you going to get into the impact of that and what's happened over time in terms of, I mean, there's less and less resources that are devoted to the news department over time, right? And that, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
and
no,
then
that's absolutely important. I mean, one of the things that I would mention in class, and this happened in the 80s, so it was relatively early on, where was it one of the news broadcasts? I mean, I worked at CBS for a year, and there was a good friend of mine that I worked with that year who stayed on and worked at CBS, and she worked in the archive. Well, she first worked in religious and cultural broadcast, but she ended up in archives. And if you're doing research for news, the folks in archives ought to be your best friend. And she just watched their budget get cut. Year after year, she watched stuff pertaining to news get moved to the entertainment division. Even earlier than that, it showed on Turner Classic Movies the other night. It's a great movie, and it kind of shows this coming. Network. Any of you familiar with Network? Faye Dunaway, William Holden, Peter Finch, as a batshit crazy broadcaster that they then end up relying on to generate ratings. It has the famous line of during a broadcast, Peter Finch's character screams at the audience. So he does the news. News is like a live program with a live audience, and he calls on viewers to go to their window, throw up the window, and yell out the window, "I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore."
Yeah. Well, I guess the other issue. Yeah. So I guess the other issue is sort of the power of the media to help set the agenda. And again, this was an issue even in the 80s, because of course I graduated before your mass media class. So I just wanted to say that. But
that's true. That's true.
I mean, I didn't. Yeah. So, but at the time, what we were talking about and observing was the power of the media to help set the agenda. And I'll never forget, I was in Washington, Washington semester, and we had the opportunity. Sam Donaldson was part of a panel. Does anybody remember Sam Donaldson other than Pat? Okay, yeah. He was kind of a character, but he sat up on stage in front of the whole AU group and basically said, "Oh, the media does not set the agenda." And I just wanted to like reach through and throttle him because I just, the topics that they pick, the way they ask the questions, I mean, that they clearly set the agenda. So anyway, just wanted to think about how that, and I haven't really thought about this in a while, but how that was a factor then, and how is it a factor now? I kind of think it still is, and it's probably even worse now, right? Because of all the cable news and.
Well, but as a short answer, because I don't want to give away the later game, but everything gets fragmented, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the agenda for folks who watch Fox News is different from a sane person's agenda, no matter what other news source they're relying upon. You're still you can still ask the question, and get national totals about what you think the most important problem is facing the nation. But it's then in these segments, where you wouldn't see the wide variation in a sense of what the most important problem is facing the nation in that era of just 3 networks and small number of newspapers. But now it can be all over the place. I mean, that's going to be one of the themes as we move into the newer system is fragmentation.
I was wondering, kind of along that line, like my brain is moving toward the change, not just in media, but the change in understanding public opinion. Like when there were 3 networks, I don't know if you're going to go into this, but like, even when you were saying throughout tonight and talking about, public opinion in general, or they generally agreed this way. So they acted. So I guess how public opinion is understood or how it was measured when there were 3 networks and a limited number of source of news and current events of what's going on in the world, compared to now, the breadth, what I would imagine would be the breadth of ability or resources or sources in general of public opinion. Like if media has broadened, public opinion or the ability to measure or find information about public opinion has also broadened. Does that make sense? It's kind of where my mind, I don't know if that fits in with your fragmented.
Yeah, let me give it a shot. In other words, it may be more misleading to think about, to use a term that I used in the policy class, to think about the informal agenda in the same way then as you would now, or to think about opinion in the same way, so that when you make generalizations about what the public thinks, the public has never been unitary, but it's more divided and fragmented now than it was then. And that's in part tied to the fact that the media environment is more fragmented and now than it was back then. So if, you could end up with there being a real, I'm going to stick with Anne's thing about the agenda, just because it's a little easier to do. You could say, well, this issue was identified by 30% of the public as the most important issue. This one was identified by 25%. This was identified by 5, 15. Well, in fact, you had like solid block. You may have had, in the current system, you may have these solid blocks who were like 80% of them thought this thing was the most important issue, and none of this other set of individuals, like 80% of Republicans think this is a really important issue, but only 5% of Democrats think it is. So when you then just do the overall percentage, it may not give you the most helpful measurement of what's on the informal agenda in the way that it could have been okay back when there was that more limited set of information sources and none of the kind of polarization that we see now. Is that kind of get in the neighborhood there?
Yeah, and I don't want to move too much into now versus
Right,
then, where I know
right,
we're
right.
focusing on establishing the foundations, but it gets me in a good place to start to think about, and obviously just human nature is comparing then and now.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's what we did last
And I'm
year on
interested
the
in,
policy thing.
right.
But I think the other thing though I wanted to say though, it's not as if you didn't have, I mean, you still had strong identification with party. Even like in the 70s and 80s. I mean, I remember just growing up and, after doing some handing out leaflets or whatever, I mean, the little kids would be like screaming at each other, I'm the Republican, I'm the Democrat, So it's not like there wasn't acrimony but it was just, but it was more sort of I'm this or I'm that. You didn't have as much, I don't know. It was different somehow, but we still had it, right? There was still rubs.
Yeah.
Right,
Let me give
Pat?
you let me give you a barometer, okay? Intermarriage. Okay. I doubt that for my generation or your generation, any of our parents would have said, you are dead to me if you marry somebody from that other party. Okay. Turn of the century, like the last. Okay. Into the early part of the 20th century. Yeah. I mean, I in my dissertation, I took a quote from New Hampshire state legislator. What is it? It's something like, we love our parties like the same way as our churches and our families. And that's at a point in time where you don't intermarry into another faith, okay? So there was that period of time where partisan conflict was strong enough, and this is different from the attachment, right? Where that conflict was strong enough that there was a norm against marrying outside of the party, okay? And lots of party identification, strong party identification, and you don't marry outside that political faith. and then that goes away. It's starting to come back. You have more folks who are telling their children, no, you are not marrying someone of that other party. You bring home, the prospective boyfriend, girlfriend, and the parents want to know. See, a Democrat, well, that wouldn't happen. I don't think it happened for any of you guys. I know it doesn't happen for any of my. It's starting to happen again. So it is different.
So one of the things that I found fascinating, only because as you're going through the nostalgia of the old media, which doesn't feel that old, but maybe it is. So I was a huge fan of the McLaughlin Group. I was one of those crazy political science nerds that had her VHS recorder programmed to record all the Sunday talk shows, because I was not getting up that early on a Sunday morning because of what was going on Saturday night. But I was definitely going to watch it before I got into class on Monday, just in case. And one of those things I loved was the McLaughlin Group. But all of this was the boundary between editorial media and the talking head and pundit, right? So we've seen this evolution of what used to be a handful of people who could either be in name, put their name on a byline and say, I'm going to editorialize this topic, or behind the guise of the New York Times editorial board, put out an opinion on something. And now it's very hard to find reporting without it, right? And so, but it's what got me really interested in the political talk shows was this sense of not just tell me the facts, but give me your perspective. And I love the balance of this one on this side and this one on the other. I'm now they can't even sit in the same Zoom room before they get cut off. But at the time, there was this sense of, healthy debate and conversation. But you saw that as being an extension of the media in a way that today, I think, most people think of talking heads and they don't necessarily think of media or reporting facts, right? So anyway, it probably was, kind of all over the place. But I think that's a topic that would be interesting to explore, right? This evolution of editorializing, right?
Yeah. So I want y'all to, and I hate this because this is something that gets used by folks that I politically don't agree with often, but I'm going to introduce the concept of the slippery slope. And 60 Minutes participates in this. So you change the way you're covering the news by providing more analysis and a more entertaining way of going at that news. And lo and behold, who would have thunk it? You get a huge audience because it's more entertaining. If you got a huge audience, that meant you were making big ass profits. Everyone will pay attention. Everybody will understand what you did that generated those profits. And if you did it to this level, we're in competition, right? So I'm going to do it to this level. And there's your slippery slope. So you get, and it's one of the things I love about the Saturday Night Live skit is that they knew where this was going. They knew that as soon as you then personalized the conflict between the participants, you really get great ratings. Hence, Jane, you ignorant slut. Okay. People liked 60 Minutes too, but I always hated it because it was going down that road. Okay. just think about the things that's going to generate a high audience. And I'm going to go a little bit off here to kind of make it's something that I learned. A lot of this business of having these conflictual pundits who are going at each other actually came from sports broadcasting. Sports broadcasting, there were a couple of guys in the New York City area, and I started watching some of that stuff, and I go, I hate you guys. But it came before what happened in politics. It came before what happened in politics on the radio, and it came before what happened on politics on TV as well. But it just keeps going in that direction. So it's going to get more like that. I guess the other point I'm going to make is that there have always been editorial pages. The newspaper would have something like that. And that's part of what I'm going to deal with next time, is that it's sort of an interesting discussion about what do you think would have more of an impact on folks' opinion? An editorial which is clearly biased, right? It's a point of view taken by the editorial board of a newspaper, okay? Do you think that would be more persuasive, or a straight up, balanced, objective newspaper article? And more effective for whom? What kinds of folks might respond to that editorial? What kinds of folks might respond to that news article? Because they're qualitatively different kinds of communication, right?
You're talking about today. Like
Well,
in current times.
This is for the old system.
Got it. Just wanted to clarify.
Because that's what if any of you are throwing some money Bob Entman's way for his book, you will see that's what he's doing in the book. He's doing quantitative analysis of the impact of different kinds of communications. And he was thinking of you guys when he wrote the book, because all of the stuff about the statistical analysis he did, he throws it in an appendix so you don't have to read it if you don't want to.
Sounds like my kind of book. Yeah. Ian says, keep in mind to distinguish print versus media. Yeah, I always get that confused, is when we talk about print versus media in general. When I say media, I think of all, like encompassing print. I think it would be interesting for when we have that future conversation to talk about today, print versus social media versus
there's mass media and social media. There's actually multiple levels.
Right.
And then I learned about a new thing this morning from my husband called the metaverse, which apparently is the future.
Ooh.
What's already happening with some of the kids now in terms of mass electronics media. I don't even know how to describe it yet, but I'll work on that.
Sounds very like Superman-esque. Kat, were you going to jump in?
Maybe your husband needs to do one of these things. Go ahead, Kat. Sorry.
I just wanted to add a comment to the agenda setting discussion about how, yes, obviously media sets the agenda. I'm also a comm studies major, so I feel like it's a tripartite kind of relationship where the media can be seen as setting the agenda because they're the one that displays it. But given the relationship, like, what did you call it? The economic market. The mass public also has some control over that agenda, because if they don't give the media the ratings and the attention that they want, then they're not going to make money. So they kind of have to listen to the public and give them what they want, which is obviously why we're getting infotainment instead of actual news. Just want to throw that out there.
I agree. I think he's frozen, so don't worry. It's not your comment. He's frozen. No, I completely agree. And I think that when we get into, it's just so hard with this topic, because when we look at, we're literally talking about a book that is 1970s, 1980s analysis, and we're going to take these foundations and then adapt them to 2021. So it's so hard, to switch, at least for me, to switch back and forth between, okay, no, he's talking about not old world. I don't want to do that, but what could be almost a lifetime, a different world, a different lifetime ago.
Speak for yourself, Michelle.
Not lifetime ago. That's more. I know, and I shouldn't say that because
You're
I'm
lucky
not
he's not on this call. Oh my God, he would have.
You know what I'm saying though? What's the world? There is like a sense of, you guys are all making fun of me, and now it's on recording. Great, and he's going to see it too. But there is, I don't want to be like horse and buggy. It's not that bad. It's okay, Pat. You left. I tried to fill in for you.
Pen and pencil, though, Michelle. That's all we had. Pen and pencil. Maybe a typewriter.
So, anyway, so we were talking about. Oh, you're on mute, Pat. He's on mute. He has no idea. He's
Pat, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Pat.
Mute.
I lost the connection there somehow.
That's all right. That's all right.
So let's bore everyone at my expense. Kat, what was your?
Oh, yeah, I was just talking about how the mass public also can play a role in agenda setting because they have the power to give media what they need, which is ratings. So it's power
I guess,
just in the media.
Yeah, well, and it's certainly something that political elites pay tons and tons of attention to, right? It's any politician worth their salt knows that they want to frame issues in a particular way if they want to get them on the agenda. So they're making an attempt to get certain sets of issues on the agenda. And those are sources for journalists.
So they have to frame them emotionally so that the journalists will cover them in a way that's interesting to the public.
Yep, absolutely. Nicely done.
Brava, bringing that public policy Redux review back in here. Good job. We thought we could escape symbolic politics, but it's all going to come right back. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, ladies. Anybody else have anything? Anybody want to jump off recording and ask a question, or are we all good? We're good? Okay.
Good for that.
All right. Well,
Okay.
Thank you so much, ladies. Thanks so much, Pat, and we'll see you next week, 8 p.m.
Terrific.
Have a good night.
Terrific.
Bye.
Take care, guys. Good seeing you.